All right, let's make a fairy village. My vision for when this started was basically just to have a little clearing with giant trees so that it looks like the sim is a fairy. I've done these enlarged builds a couple of times before, so I'm used to kind of how finicky it can be to work with things at that large size, but it's easier when you do it on this 64 by 64 lot because then you really have room to size things up quite a bit. I've never used these Cottage Living trees from the debug menu before, and they really make a good shape. You can put them together and they make kind of like a circular vignette of trunk around the house if you have them that large. I'm definitely going to use that again. They take up a lot of space, but I kind of wanted them to. My idea was that I wanted it to look like the fairy village was growing on top of these trees and on top of like a tree that died and fell over, and then the fairy village kind of grew from that like fungus. So that's the idea. If you go up from the basement like this, you can blend it with the terrain because I made a little dip in the terrain to kind of make it look like a puddle. So I like to go down a couple levels in the basement to raise things up so that the trunk blends in and it doesn't have that flat line. I think the main thing that makes it look realistic is if the terrain has any shape to it. So I sacrifice the easiness of flatness in order to get that visual effect. And you get used to it. It's just a little finicky because you have to like do it a couple of times because the vertical position doesn't stay the same when you pick up the object. But yeah, this is me just kind of placing white boxes around to get a visual for how I want it to look. I didn't really plan this out specifically. I just knew I wanted to have little fairy houses at varying levels, kind of going up towards the center to make it look like a city or a little village. Most of the ones on the ground are the larger ones that I'm going to put housing in because the upper ones are a little bit difficult to play in because of the camera bobbing up and down. But I tried to do a good mix of like fake houses and real houses, or like skill areas that you don't have to spend a ton of time in. But I didn't really decorate the interior. You'll see. Yeah, see, so like this log, I had to move it around a million times from the basement to see if it was in the correct position because I knew I wanted to have houses on top of the log. And I had to move it later on anyways, so it doesn't even matter. But yeah, I had to use that second one that doesn't have the grass on it, so it doesn't look like the grass is floating. But I like to put ferns on top of it anyways, just to make it look a little bit more lush. I've done these like floating villages before in the past, with platforms, raising them up and down. And the trick is, at least the way I do it now, is I put one room on the first level and then I attach a platform to that and then raise the platform up and down. That way everything that's on a platform is on at least level 2 and you don't end up with higher levels being below lower levels. I did that once on accident where like the third floor was lower than the second floor or something because I had set up the position wrong from the beginning. So like here I had to move everything over in order to get it to line up with that grass correctly, and then I ended up moving it later anyways because you couldn't get at the front of that building. But if I had planned it out from the beginning, I would have seen that there wasn't enough space there. But I kind of like to just sketch it out, kind of sculpt it out, and get a feel for how it looks instead of having a plan right from the beginning because you never really know until you get in front of it if it looks wonky at that shape or something. So you'll see me redo and remake a lot of things a lot. And I also have this annoying habit. I tried to stop because I filmed another video. I did more of a build with me style video that'll probably go up before this. I didn't notice until I was editing that video that I have a weird habit of whenever I change anything or place anything down, I flick the mouse and I whip the camera around a little bit, like I'm like tweaking it every time I change something. And I tried to stop doing that. I tried to hold still in one position and not flick the mouse every time I set something down. And it was like I couldn't see what I was doing. So it's it's got to be doing something. I don't really understand what or why, but it just feels faster and easier that way. So I'm sorry if it makes you a little dizzy. So this is the main building that I wanted to have like kind of growing out of the tree. So that's the one that's the least realistic to hang out in long term because it's so hard to see. But you could put a little like terrace there or skill area there or something. Now you might be wondering what's my opinion on the upcoming Enchanted by Nature expansion pack. And I should have waited for the gameplay trailer to come out before I recorded this. But okay, it's the next day. I watched it. I'm still really conflicted. There are parts of it that I'm really excited about. There's a stick fence. I don't have to build stick fences from scrap anymore. Or there's so many new plants, though it does look like they're repeating the same tree everywhere, which drives me nuts. Like the background of the one town is just the same tree repeated on the hillside. I hope that's just like a mock-up, but I don't know. The fairy world, the thing that I was most excited about was the fairy world, because I was imagining a place where you could be in like this with enlarged plants and trees everywhere and then build to look like you're a tiny fairy in that large nature environment. And it looks like it kind of does that. Like some of the plants are enlarged. There's like an enlarged pink flower from that base game desert flower. And it looks like you can build a lot inside that one tree. But again, that tree is also very like flat and cartoony, and the build stuff looks good. I really like the windows and the leaf rugs. Like I want to see more like the leaf rugs where it looks like something from nature. One of the plants that's in the world is directly used in building the house or something like a fairy would do. I don't know. I'm still conflicted. I guess in my head I thought it would be that if you turn into a fairy, you can travel to a world where you're like kind of zooming in on a part of a park or something, and then suddenly everything is huge. Like, I feel like that wouldn't be very difficult to do. But from what I can see, it's like a blend, because the trees are still really small. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. But there's a stone fence that looks really good. I like all the stone wallpaper and the stone flooring. That's something I'm definitely interested in, but we'll see. I just need to see somebody play it. I still think it's going to be good. Like, I'm excited for it. The main reason is I know I'm not going to do gameplay with it because I'm not a game player. I'm mostly building most of the time. So I'm curious to know what other builders think about it, because the gameplay part of it looks really cool. And I would love to design a fairy and play as a fairy, because the animations for that actually look really adorable. And the furniture is so cute. But I don't know. This was me realizing that I could put little fake houses in this one tree branch that sticks out, because you can kind of see it from the ground. There's like enough open space in the foliage to see it. So that was really exciting, because I love putting these little false buildings up at the top to help make it look larger and like it's kind of spreading upwards. You could put a ladder inside of there for access to it. It's probably not very pleasant because of the camera angle, but I didn't do that just because I just wanted it to be more of a set piece. But you can put a ladder in it, because technically the game doesn't know that that tree exists because it's coming up from the basement. So you can walk through it, you can build into it, and it doesn't get in the way, which is really nice. That's why I like doing that trick with not just with stuff that needs to blend in with the terrain, but with stuff that needs to blend in with the path that the sim is walking on. Because when it's enlarged, you also enlarge the footprint. So sometimes that can block off access to half your lot if you're not raising it up from the basement. There's probably an easier way to do that with mods, but I just can't do it. I push the limits way too much in my builds to use mods. I'm breaking it on almost every single lot anyways, so I imagine it would be a lot more difficult the more things I download and add to it. That's also why I don't really have a lot of packs, because I mean, I haven't been playing that long. I've only been playing for a couple of years, so I haven't really accumulated a lot of packs. But even those, I tend to just, and I end up building in base game anyways. So it ends up not even being worth it. I talk myself out of it constantly. Like, I've been trying to talk myself into getting seasons for like a year now. It's gone on sale 3 times since I started hemming and hawing about whether or not I wanted it. Because I do want the weather effects. I think it adds a lot aesthetically to the build. If I'm just doing building, there's enough of a reason there to do it. But also, I do play with gardening a lot, especially with Cottage Living, and it would make that more complicated, which I think it needs to be. So I might do that, but like I said, my lots break a lot. The one I'm posting before this, that one almost broke. And it's not like I'm not trying to push it. I mean, I am kind of trying to push it. I've learned my own little suspicious tricks for what does and doesn't break the build. And that's been serving me probably at like a 50% rate, so I guess better than nothing. But this lot crashed, I think, twice while I was building it, but I didn't freak out thinking that it was corrupted, because it kind of felt like it should have crashed because I was messing with the roof once a lot of stuff was already on. So I kept going, hoping that it would work, and it did. So sometimes you get lucky. Also for this one, because it is an enlarged aesthetic, I didn't want to make it too messy with plants. So even though it's a huge lot, there's actually a lot less objects, a lot less items on the lot for it to get bogged down with, because everything is bigger and it's blocking the path. Like, one of those trees could cover up like a garden with 500 flowers in it. Takes up a lot of space. But yeah, see, I started with this brownish roof. I always use this roof because it's the one base game roof. It's the only roof I have that doesn't have white under the eaves, except the glass ones. So a lot of times I try to make it look different, and then I end up defaulting back to this roof anyways, because I just hate how it looks. And there's not a lot of styles where you can tuck in the eaves and it doesn't look weird, in my opinion. So I go back and forth. It's always a fight with me in every single lot, pulling the eaves in and out, messing with it. Because I also never use white walls. I rarely use white walls. Sometimes I do for like the Irish cottages. So it doesn't match ever. And I cannot not see it. It drives me crazy. So I did change things around a bunch of times on this build. I wanted to make it look kind of eclectic. So I'm using all these Cottage Living doors with varying palettes or varying swatches. I don't really play around with the pack that much because I like things to be mostly base game if I can. But it's really nice, especially because I do like most of the stuff that's in the Cottage Living pack. So it's kind of nice to just stretch through that, because these doors are really cute and the windows are really cute. The interior stuff, I struggle a little bit with the colors. For this kind of fairy tale vibe, you can kind of get away with a lot in exterior design, like putting these two windows next to each other. Like, you can do things that don't really make sense because it's supposed to look whimsical. That's why I use this aesthetic a lot, because it's very forgiving. And here I am fighting with the platforms. I realized while I was editing this that it would have been much easier to just make a tiny little platform with all of the floor and ceiling and trim on it that I wanted, and just copy that over every time instead of redoing it for each one back and forth. That probably would have saved me 20 minutes at least. This is where it all starts to look, well, let's ignore this experimental phase. Don't worry, the green doesn't stay there. I think the one thing that we're missing besides the natural wood paneling is like a large stone wallpaper, like a rough multicolored stone wall. Okay, here's where I love using this green roof to look. Doesn't that look like a leaf? Like a big leaf that they just folded over to use for a roof. So that's when this started to really come together for me, because the wood with that green tone looks really good and very fairy tale, in my opinion, very fairy. It matches the trees beautifully, but then I have these white under eaves, but I do tuck them in later on, which looks okay, but it doesn't have that like whimsical flair of seeing the eaves kind of flicking out. That makes it look even more leaf-like. So you'll see what I did with it in the end, but I think it ended up looking really cute. This is where it starts to, the scale illusion starts to come together for me. As soon as the ferns go in, because ferns come in all shapes and sizes, but as soon as you have these enlarged ferns next to the enlarged trees, and they're almost the size of the houses, then you get this big, small illusion that the Sims are just little fairies in this world. Because before it was just really huge trees, and now it's contextual. Gotta use these Cottage Living fairy lights. And then we're gonna put some fireflies on here and just get the vibe going. 90% of the point of this is the fireflies. I really like this debug mushroom from Cottage Living, but I don't know if it's my settings. If you back up 2 feet from it, it turns into a triangle. And I have my render distances on high, and even when you're in like the free cam mode, it does it, which doesn't make any sense to me. I still use them because they're really cute, and there's not really an alternative to that. I've made them out of roofs before, but I didn't want to add even more roofs to this build. So for the terrain paint, normally I go really small with a really small brush and do painstaking detail. But for this, I wanted the terrain paint to also play with the illusion a little bit. So I'm pretending that the big brush is the little brush and making larger tone variations. Yeah, the ferns are really doing a lot. I like using them also because they are really scraggly, so they fill in holes really well. Like if you have rocks layered like this, blending little ferns in between the rocks helps cover up the flat edges, and especially when you're on lumpy terrain where that flat edge is exposed, makes it a lot easier. And it looks more natural than a lot of the other foliage. So I usually go fern heavy when it's supposed to look forested, because ferns like to be really... Oh yeah, this is where I realized I could put a little fake house inside of those logs. Initially I was going to see if I could have a walking path through them, but that would be hard to see through anyways, and you couldn't really decorate it. So this ended up being a much better option. You can't go in there, but I wanted it to look like there's little fairy houses inside of the log. So I did that on this one and then on the other one. It was a little finicky. I think it might be easier if you did the house first and then put the log on top of it, but this probably worked out a little bit better because I could get the position exactly where I wanted it with the walls instead of with the log, which is hard to position from the basement. And then the ferns just cover up the little bits that poke out. So it ended up being pretty forgiving. And I put lanterns on there too so that there's a little bit of a glow coming out of it at night. I wanted the lot to look almost better at night because of all these little glowy elements, like the fairies are having parties in the forest at night. I'm putting in more of a path that the fairies would take, so now I'm using the smaller brush, so that it looks like they've worn a path in the moss over time. And usually I just like to create triangles because that looks more realistic to me, so I use the smallest brush I can to create triangles between the moss and the grass and the mud, so that it looks like it's overgrowing itself a little bit. So a lot of times you're fighting off that rounded shape and using the eraser to trim it. So this is the access to that middle building. Initially I was going to put a ladder there, but this way, in order to get to the highest building, you have to kind of walk through two of them to get there. So it's not the most private apartment complex, but I don't think fairies would be anyways. So at some point that little cabin up there moved off of the branch. I didn't notice when it happened, so I ended up having to move the tree back in order to line up with it. I cut most of it out because it was really frustrating going back and forth with it, but sometimes you just accidentally click on something and drag it and you don't even realize. Or moving the platform back did that. I don't know. And then I decided to put more of these little fake buildings up in the branches because it's just a perfect little spot for it. You could make a treehouse build with this tree, I think. People probably do. Usually I do one with a thinner trunk because then you can make the house go all the way around it. I used the those swampy base game ones for my Lothlorien build because the trunk is really bare and straight, and then the foliage is kind of condensed close to the trunk and every few feet or so, so you got a lot of room to put stuff on top of it. I ended up having to fill it out with a lot more branches though, just to get it to feel more like you were in the trees, because they are kind of bare unless you get like a bunch of them. But I also used the I think they're pines or cedars from Cottage Living debug as well, because those have the nice tall straight trunks. That's for if you don't want any foliage in your way. But I put 2 more of these little fake houses in, and then time for more ferns. Really can't get enough of them in this one because they just make it so much more green and lush the more you add. And you can make them any size you want, though I tried to keep them fairly large to keep the illusion. Yeah, I played around with these swatches a lot. I probably could continue doing that. If I kept playing on this build, I would just switch the door swatches back and forth forever. And I kept some of the clips of the interior in, even though this isn't really groundbreaking. I complained enough about interior design on my last video. If you want to hear me whining about putting an interior together, watch that video. So I'm just doing basic bare bones here just to have like a livable space. It's just one of those things where I can do exterior design from my head pretty easily. I just look at a couple inspo pictures usually. This one I think I looked at I half looked at one inspo picture, but I already knew what I wanted to do anyway, so it didn't make a difference. But if I want to make an interior look good, if I want to make an interior look real, I have to do it as close to a picture as I possibly can. Otherwise, it just ends up kind of random. Playtesting the platforms a little bit. Should have done that a lot earlier. It's kind of a miracle that this worked at all. I was pretty careful, so it makes sense, but stuff happens. This whole thing took me I think 6 hours total. I've done this kind of design before, so I didn't really have to spend a lot of time figuring out exactly how I wanted it. So that's why it was fairly quick. And I didn't make it very detailed. This is pretty minimalist compared to how I could have done it. So that saved me a lot of time. But okay, here was my initial solution for the eaves problem because I really wanted them back. So I'm thinking, what if I just use these little pieces to create edges with the roof texture that does have paint under the eaves? And I might use this trim in another design in the future. I don't think it really works for the fairy vibe. But this version with the glass edges, I think I've seen people do this before with base game builds in like castle designs or whatever. I always assumed it was from a pack or something. But when you mix it with the color of the rest of the roof, it really gives it this nice filigree edge. I don't know. Maybe I'm just used to looking at it the other way and I'm tricking myself now, but I think this looks kind of good. And it could even be like, you know how when leaves decay or when something's been munching on them and the veins are still behind and there's like a lacy effect. It could be like a little lacy leaf that the fairies trimmed the edges or something. I think it works. I think especially with it at that green color, it makes sense. Maybe not this gray one, but I wanted a little bit of variety. Either way, it's much better visually than the white under the eaves, though you do have to be careful to put in the right roof trim because there's a gap that shows if you use the invisible roof trim, the furthest left option. There's like a gap between the wall and the roof, which I don't understand because then you can't tuck in the eaves at all most of the time unless you're using trim. But that's another battle. See these pointy windows, I think this is when it starts to look really fairy tale. I just put them in random groupings, groups of 1 or 2 or 3. Very cute. They'd also be good on a turret. These would be good turret windows. I think Cottage Living, the most of the time when I'm bemoaning not using any packs, it's because I want access to those Cottage Living windows and the vines. The vines are beautiful. I didn't put any vines on this build because the houses are so small. I could have put some growing up the trees, I guess, but I think it looks more realistic to have them a little bit more bare. Here's some more interior. I put another kind of apartment in this house. You could divide this in half because there's 2 front doors for some reason to make it look like there's more houses in the village. You could divide this in half and have it just be like rental units with just the beds instead of having a bathroom and a kitchen in every build. Make it more communal. Have the kitchen in one of the main buildings and then everyone can eat together outside maybe. But this was just to have something there for the little playtesting fairies. I feel like I build my interiors specifically so that people can redo them. These are not great, but I'll get better. I'm looking up some tips and tricks, but it's not the urge to. It's not the inspiration. It's hard for me to want to do it if I'm not inspired, and I'm more inspired by the exterior. So, different strokes, you know. This is cute to me. The yellow flowers, I think, this is where it starts to look really picturesque on this front edge. Whatever I'm doing, I automatically end up choosing a favorite angle. And then I really play favoritism in terms of the plants that I put there and the care and attention that I take to making it look perfect because I just want to look at it from that one angle. That's pretty much it. So this is already up on the gallery. I called it Fairy Village by LindsayLives. And it's on the 64 by 64 farm lot in Henford on Bagley. I also filmed a build with me of my storybook cottage. I'll post that at the same time. The audio isn't great, so I'm putting this up too to kind of compensate for that because the audio is slightly better. But I slowed down the sped up clips for the end of this just to do a little aesthetic trailer for the build. So I'll shut up for that part. But thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.